The Neo Geo brings the arcade experience to the home console. That's what you always hear when someone talks about the Neo Geo. And it is true to a certain extent. The Neo Geo home hardware was almost exactly the same as the arcade system, with just a few practical differences in terms of video and audio output. But when I look at the Neo Geo's first year of games, those released in 1990 in what we now call the system's launch window, I'm starting to think that what the Neo Geo really did was bring the console experience to the arcade. That was, after all, one of the Neo Geo's selling points to arcade operators. All you needed to buy was one sort of expensive arcade machine and switch out the relatively cheap game cartridges, rather than spending thousands on a really expensive new machine every couple of years. What is apparent to me after playing the Neo Geo's 1990 lineup, or 1991 if you're going by American release dates, is that the Neo Geo proves that it isn't fancy graphics or sound that make for a great game. It's the gameplay. Going by Japanese release dates, you could play 11 games on the Neo Geo in the year 1990, and none of them are spectacular. They were truly next generation on a technical level, but they weren't next generation in terms of their gameplay, and it would take years for the Neo Geo's game design to catch up to its technology. I'm your man out of Japan, Jay Contra, and I'm going to show you every Neo Geo game from the year 1990. We start with Nam 1975, and as implied by the title, the game takes us to Vietnam in the year 1975. Taking clear inspiration or outright copying Hollywood depictions of the war, the over-the-shoulder rail shooter takes great advantage of the Neo Geo's arcade stick to control your aim. You will spend countless credits on your first playthroughs, and you have just one chance to defeat the final boss. You don't even get to continue. Die, and the whole world explodes. To me, this breaks the covenant you have with the arcade machine. As long as you have the quarters, you should be able to finish the game. This will come up as we go through the rest of the list, but early Neo Geo games are much more difficult than later releases. Baseball Stars Professional doesn't do anything extraordinary in terms of gameplay, but it is cool to play on a team that includes both Lucifer and Beelzebub, and it's also very progressive, with both men and women playing on the same professional team. In the year 1990, I didn't expect all that much from sports games, but I can say that this is probably the best looking 2D baseball game that I've ever played. It wouldn't be a Japanese home console without a Mahjong game. And after playing these for hours on end, I still haven't figured out how Mahjong works. And it doesn't help that Japanese Mahjong has its own rule set with a complicated path to victory. But it's not particularly stand out from other console Mahjong games. It's just nicer looking and better sounding than the one Nintendo released for the Famicom 7 years before in 1983. You can make your own character, and there is sort of a story, but you'll have to be very good at Mahjong to progress. Something unique to the game is a special 21-button controller, although it's difficult to find and costs more than twice the game itself, which is already very expensive. The first platformer released for the Neo Geo, Magician Lord, is an incredibly difficult game in a list of already quarter-consuming titles. I love the different forms you can take, like the ninja that throws fireballs, but you won't stay in these forms for very long because of the sheer volume of dangerous enemies that you have to cut through. While the voice acting is very bad.
What imprudent, you human being! Face your trial by God.
The fact that it exists at all is another one of those distinguishing factors that defined the early Neo Geo, setting it apart from its contemporaries. And in my most controversial opinion, Magician Lord sounds like a Sega Genesis game, which is to say, bad. Another sports game for the Neo Geo, Top Players Golf, shows just how design philosophy can hold a game back despite advanced graphics and sounds. Top Players Golf should be much more playable than what we received from SNK. You can aim your ball, but there's no indicator to show how far your shot might go, so you have no idea how your choice of club is going to affect your distance. And you will be spending a credit after every hole. Get a triple bogey, insert a coin. Get par, insert a coin. Arcade games can be cruel, but why a golf game? Riding Hero is a bizarre experience. Half of the game is a standard motorcycle racer that kind of reminds me of F1 Race for the Famicom and anticipates Road Rash for the Sega Genesis. The time limit is very strict, and you will have to maintain first or second place to have even a shot of finishing the race before the timer runs out. The other half of the game is a single-player racing RPG, and you will have to spend a credit every 3 minutes. This gets particularly aggravating when you are in the middle of a race, and the story races are not easy. You are racing down crowded streets full of mopeds, cars, and trucks, and I spent most of my time getting knocked into the many signs on the side of the road. Sometimes you get injured when you crash, but the game doesn't explain how these injuries affect you, and you have to travel all the way to the hospital to learn if you've even been hurt. The game also doesn't tell you how much money you have, so if you lose the race and can't pay the bet, you get smacked upside the head by your opponent. When I think of arcade games, I think of beat-em-ups, and Ninja Combat is pretty good. It is fairly basic. The techniques aren't quite as satisfying as a Final Fight or Streets of Rage, but it is fun to try out the new characters you pick up as you advance. The game is not easy, and you will be slamming the insert coin button to get more continues. The bosses become much more difficult, and for some reason, much more Japanese as you progress through the game. Ninja Combat is another exemplar of the Neo Geo's ability to store voice acting samples, but it makes all of the characters sound like nerds.
Yeah, I think it'll be quiet now.
The Super Spy is my favorite Neo Geo game from the year 1990. The giant sprites and first-person action are wonderful to see, but the gameplay is a bit ancient, sort of like those first-person RPGs from the 80s, where you can only see one frame of the map at a time rather than getting a full 360-degree view. It is fun, though, to create a mental image of your environment and navigate around it. You'll spend your time managing your knife, which is very powerful, but degrades as you defeat enemies to the point where it's more efficient to use your fists. You also have a pistol, but have a limited number of shots. It's the game's bomb that you need to keep handy whenever you go up against a boss or really tough enemies. My only problem with the Super Spy is its length. I think a decent arcade game should last about half an hour, and any longer means that replaying the game to practice becomes that much more grueling. But the Super Spy can take up to 2 hours to finish. After the first level, you're just facing tougher versions of the same enemies, without any new mechanics being added. Every Neo Geo run-and-gun game has to be compared to Metal Slug, and Cyberlip is no Metal Slug. It's an almost cutesy-looking platform shooter, which is eerie when juxtaposed against the apocalyptic backgrounds and grotesque bosses. And there's a strange elevator mechanic where you have to guess which way to go to continue the game. Guess wrong, and you have to trudge through a short sewer level to get to the right stage. The power-ups aren't super helpful either, with a grenade that's powerful but limits your range of fire, and a wide shot that doesn't give you the satisfying spread of the Contra equivalent. Oh, and why is the game called Cyberlip? Because of the cyber lips on the evil cyber villain, of course.
My name is Cyberlip. I am the supercomputer you are looking for.
When I was doing research for this video, I was blown away to find out that Tetris was one of the most popular arcade games in Japan in the late 80s and early 90s. In today's day and age, it's hard to imagine someone leaving the house and going to the arcade just to play a fancy version of Tetris, but the market was there. I imagine that's why the Neo Geo had Joy Joy Kid, localized as Puzzled for the English language market. It's pretty much Tetris with the added twist that your goal is to clear a path for a balloon at the bottom of the screen. This gets really hard, really fast, but this could be good fun for people who are much better at puzzles than I am. The last game in our 1990 Neo Geo tour is League Bowling, another unassuming sports game. Games go pretty quick, and you can do a whole round in less than 5 or 10 minutes. There's a couple of different modes besides just standard bowling, but all they do is inflate your score depending on how and when you get a strike. This game does remind me of the days when bowling alleys played funny clips after you got a strike, spare, or split. Something else I learned researching this video is that Capcom had its own coin-operated bowling lanes in Japan, which makes total sense, but it's something I never expected to see. The Neo Geo would go on to be an amazing system, but the first year of game releases feel pretty weak, both by contemporary and modern standards. Although it's not fair to compare the first ever games for a completely new system to the titles being released by veteran studios for established platforms, but we're talking about games that were released for $200 to $300 at retail. I think some kind of comparison is justified. For every Riding Hero, there was an F-Zero, and for every Cyberlip, a Contra. What's obvious to me is that the Neo Geo we think of today took time to evolve. The Neo Geo launched without a fighting game, and the graphics, while impressive when directly compared to the newly launched Super Nintendo, wouldn't fully develop until years into the console's life cycle. The Neo Geo revolutionized how people consumed arcade and home console games, but it took a while for the potential of game design to catch up with the technological possibilities of the system, and I can't wait to see what's in store for next year. I've been your man out of Japan, Jay Contra, and I stream every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over at twitch.tv/JayContra. I hope to see you there. Mahalo.